I wanted to fill up my car this morning. It was £65 to fill it up. England has reached a pivot point in petrol prices. It's now £2 a litre. That's actually quite good. I'm told that in Finland it's £2.50 a litre and in Germany it's £2.20 a litre. That's a madness. So I went into the supermarket and looked at this cooking oil, £1.50 a litre. Of course, everybody went through that craze of turning cooking oil into diesel, and right now this is shooting up to the same price as the price of petrol, and I could only buy 2 of these at any one time. They're restricting purchase because all those bright sparks who think about doing that have been rushing down to Asda to buy this stuff and fill up their cars with it, and it's created a shortage and a price increase in cooking oil. So it's not a solution, it's just a short-term stopgap measure. The problem is, what the hell is the solution? Because of course, those prices aren't going to come down. Have you ever seen a price where it shoots up and then drops down to its original level? I haven't. I've seen it shoot up and come down a little bit, but stay there. And that's what we're in for. We're in for high fuel prices. It's going to be with us forever. So what's the solution? Of course, those things are things like electric vehicles, e-scooters and e-bikes and bicycles themselves. The problem to my mind with such stuff is it's just not imaginative. There's nothing sexy about it. It's kind of like old hat stuff that's been revamped. If you take a car and just stick an electric motor in it, hey presto. That depresses me to a degree because I'd like something much more exciting. I don't know if you remember Sir Clive Sinclair. Sir Clive Sinclair shot to fame with Sinclair Research, where he had created the Spectrum, the ZX Spectrum. The home computer market took off with Sinclair, and he was riding the wave of that and a leader of it. And they made him a knight because of it. He did incredibly well. Then he got carried away with his own success, probably, thinking that he could create markets where markets didn't exist. And that certainly seemed to be the case in home computing. So he always had an interest in electric vehicles, and he began with something called the C1. It was called the C1 because it was the Clive Prototype 1, so it was the C1. And it went through a whole load of development through the 80s till it became the C5. And of course the C5 is infamous as being the biggest marketing flop in post-war history in the UK. I think personally it was phenomenal, but as most people are agreeing these days, it was well ahead of its time. Now, it was launched in 1985 on the 1st of January at Alexandra Palace. Huge fanfare. They had, I think it was a couple of hundred models there for the journalists to try out. There's only one slight problem: none of them worked. And so the journalists got in. It's the middle of winter, obviously, it's 10th of January. They're on a hill, so they're trying to go up an icy hill on something that really would only do 50 miles per hour on the flat. It had a 250 watt motor and it just couldn't cope with it. So these things were dying after a minute or two's use and just couldn't manage it. And so the reporting on it was brutal, to say the least. Now the plans for the C5 were something like 200,000 units per annum to sell. They actually sold in total 5,000. They only managed to sell 5,000 of these things, and they pop up. You can see them on eBay where you can get them for, it's about £900 or so. There's a whole range of prices. They originally sold for £400, which is about £1,500, £2,000 in today's money. And today's money you can buy one for about 900 quid or so. So collectors did buy them. They were quite a fad, and they are around, and you can pick them up as projects or revamped versions to own a C5. And I must admit, I am looking for one because they are what I consider a sexy machine. Now, they are a recumbent tricycle, basically, and they do have their limitations. The original version used a lead-acid battery and would have, I think the range was something like 20 miles, so the Americans tested it and said it was 10 miles. And top speed was claimed to be 15 miles per hour, and it had been tested independently at 12 miles per hour. It could climb a 1 in 7 hill with the pedals, but the motor would overheat, which was challenging in itself. And of course, for the British weather, there is no waterproofing at all. was very low down at the time when they had no awareness of that kind of vehicle on the road, and so you were sat at your head height, and if you at the height of a wheel, if you sat next to a lorry, all the exhaust fumes, which then weren't actually catalytically converted, it was using fully leaded petrol, were blasting exhaust fumes into your face. Just an utter disaster. And they reckon that the reason it was an utter disaster is because it couldn't define its market. So Clive wanted this to be a replacement of personal transportation. So he wanted it to seriously compete with the car, and of course it couldn't do that. It could possibly be a improvement on the bicycle, but it was never actually done that way. So it wasn't presented as a technological toy that replaced the bicycle. It was presented as a serious alternative for cars. So it tried to hit two markets, neither of them very successfully, and nobody bought into it. The main way of buying one was by mail order. And it's no surprise because Sinclair Electronics was a mail order company, but of course with something like that, you can't actually go and touch it, feel it, sit in it, try it. And so the mail order was an utter disaster because of course mail order involves risk, a much higher risk, and for 400 quid, or rather what is about £2,000, people just weren't doing it. So they managed 5,000 sales. Now the Sinclair C5 was designed in line with 1983 legislation that came through in Britain, and it was the 1983 legislation that set all of the stuff that we currently have. So the motor assist, the electric motor assist on a bicycle is 250 watts, and that was set in 1983. The maximum weight, including battery, was 60 kilos, again, another 1983 thing, and the maximum speed was 15 miles per hour. So that's all you could do. But if you did that with an electric bicycle, courtesy of lobbying by Raleigh, then you could drive this thing at any age without training and without a license. And Sir Clive wanted to get right in on that slot, and he tried. The design itself was actually pretty cool. Some good work went on the design, and the chassis was made by Lotus. So a very reputable manufacturers were putting their time into this. Hoover were the people who assembled it, but it still failed, and the reckoning is because it was ahead of its time. It was ahead of its time in too many ways. The major one being obviously road use. But these days, of course, that's all changed. We now have e-scooters dashing around all over the place. The issue I've got with electric bicycles is they just look like a bicycle with a motor on it. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. Bicycles are something that's legacy that everybody understands and knows, and you're quite high on the road. So I don't think it's a bad thing in itself. But I do think it's unimaginative. And I think that if something were to come that was a little more imaginative on how to look at this problem, then the market that wasn't there in 1985 is there now. I suspect quite strongly that if there were a brave enough soul to buy those moulds, which are probably sitting in a field in Devon rusting, to buy those moulds and reproduce the C5, if I'll get you 10, it'd be a brilliant seller these days. I, for one, would certainly buy one. I occasionally look on eBay to see if there's a C5 going that I would pay for. And hopefully one day there will be, and we'll see a C5 on this bench that I can actually do some work on. Anyway, I thought I would give you a little lowdown on the C5, what it looks like, how imaginative and ahead of the time it was, and a little wishful thinking, if only somebody would do something similar. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you very much for watching, and please do remember to like and subscribe.